All right, why don't you let us know who is on the call, please?
Okay, I'd be glad to do that. We do have two people that have called in. One is Lee Corman is on a phone rather than computer. And I do see that one other person has called in, but we can't see who that is.
I called in and I'm also on the computer because I couldn't get the sound.
Okay, good. So that's what we see you twice, Karen. Okay. Yeah, okay, so we're seeing Karen Lombard, Nora Barron, Nancy Hackerman, Annie Sandler, Bruce Corman, Lisa Cohn, Jack Myers. We have Karen Gonzalez, Irv Smokler, Lee Corman, Gary Freed has just joined us. Hi, Gary, nice to see you.
Hey.
And just if I've missed anyone, maybe someone just joined in the last couple of seconds. I apologize if I missed anyone. If I haven't said your name, could you just let us know if you're on the call, please? Okay.
All right, I think then we've got who we're going to have. And thank you all for taking the time to be with us this morning. We don't Zoom very often. In fact, I can't remember the last time if we ever have Zoom, but I'm hoping this will be a way for us to, is that a verb? I'm hoping that this will be a way for us to keep in closer contact than we have been able to do without this facility. We're also, of course, going to meet in October in New York. The purpose of this meeting is to give our new executive director, who's not so new anymore, a chance to reflect and tell us what he thinks about what he's seen, and more important, what he would like to see happen in Brookdale. He and I talked about this, and I said, will you tell us, what do you see and what would you like to see happening to Brookdale in the next 3 to 5 years? If you could have every single thing that you wanted, what's your vision? And
Karen, there's a possibility because of you. I think there may be some feedback because you have both the camera and the telephone.
Does anybody else hear that noise?
Karen Lombard?
Sounds like a fire drill.
Sometimes that feedback loop might happen because you have both the telephone open. Maybe it's possible to mute one of those.
it would probably be helpful if everybody muted their phones unless they wanted to speak. All right, so
Jesus Christ.
all right, so I was just about concluded, and I'm going to ask Michael to give us his impressions for what he has seen and what he would like to see, and then we'll have a chance to do some discussion at the end. Michael, did I miss anything?
No, Irv, that was a perfect introduction. Thank you very much. So as Irv mentioned, first of all, it's a really great pleasure to be able to meet everyone and to see you together. It's exciting to have this type of a meeting and to see everyone from where they are. And also we have the privilege of having Daniel Dover with us here in the room as well. It's not every day that we get a chance to talk to everyone all at once, and I'm excited about that. In about a week or two, I'll be coming up at the end of my first year. Myers-JDC-Brookdale, and it is a natural time for reflection. I feel that having spent some time studying the Institute and the work that we do and getting to know the people and the challenges that we face, that now I feel more ready to share some of the things that I've learned and to share some of the challenges that I see and to ask for your guidance and your input and your feedback. Everyone else here is very experienced and versed in what the Institute does and in the challenges that it's faced in the past and on the excellent work that has always been done here at Brookdale. And so I really do look to the lay leadership for guidance and input. I've done some homework. I put out a draft of the challenges and the goals that I see certainly for 2019 and beyond. And at this point in the evolution of the strategy, I'd like to stop and to share with you what it is that I've observed so far and some of my thoughts. And after that, to stop and to hear the input from our lay leaders, basically to see, are we on the same page? Am I addressing the right things? Do you think that I've missed something? Should I be working on phrasing and terminology? What is your own experience, both from your personal fields of expertise and your experience as lay leaders in JDC? What other guidance can you give me so that I can continue working on this draft strategy and produce a stronger and more rounded document that also includes the input and feedback from our lay leadership. So with that having been said, what I'd like to do is to move forward and say about how I'd like to present these thoughts. The first is going to be the challenges that we've identified. The second is going to be specifically our relationship with the government of Israel, both as a partner in the Institute and as our largest client. And third, to map out the top 5 goals that we have identified here for 2019. When I use the pronoun we, maybe I can say a few words about how we went about creating this draft of a strategy. It was done together with all of the senior staff that you have known for many years. Together we talked about the Institute and looked at the work that we have been doing and the challenges that everyone sees in their own individual channel of work and the challenges that we see cross-cutting throughout the Institute. We prepared this draft that we'll be looking at together. Everyone here knows that I'm bringing it to this forum for a discussion so that we can get input, and then we'll see how that affects each of the individual channels of work that we're doing in the Institute altogether. So just to sum up that point, it's certainly not my own individual observations alone, but this is work that's been done throughout the Institute. To make it a little easier, what I'd like to do now is to share my screen, and it'll be something that we can look at together. This is an executive summary. I hope that everyone can see a document, a Word document now on their screen. Can you see that?
What'd you do?
If just one person maybe can affirm that you can see a document on your screen.
Yes, I can see it.
Okay, yeah. Thank you. So we'll go back to my showing my camera later, but in the meantime, this might be just a little easier to have the document in front of us. We can go over it together. This is an executive summary. It's a page and a half that I sent out ahead of the meeting. Behind this document is a synopsis that I sent to you. I know it's a long document. I apologize for that, but it was important for me that you all have at least the synopsis to look at. Even if you have comments to make on this further along the line while we're talking or down the road, there's an even larger document that has a full scan of all the environments and fleshes out some of these challenges and goals even further that we're happy to share with anyone, but I know that you all get a lot of information and a lot of documents to look at, so we try to be as brief and concise as possible. So if we look at that first paragraph about the challenges, here at the Institute we have identified a number of key challenges, mostly in the social landscape. I think that behind this we can dig deeper and see that these challenges have been broken down into a scan of the social environment, the government environment, the philanthropic environment, the internal environment within the Institute. And when we bring those down to their most basic elements, these are some of the top issues that we see mostly in the social environment. The first has to do with the aging population. That is a tremendous demographic issue. It is one that is not new, and I know that has been discussed with this forum in the past. We don't see that issue going away anytime soon, and that is definitely a top priority as we move forward. Employment and poverty, the play between those two, the issue of families in poverty, of working poor, of a growing pressure on housing, those are all issues that we see coming together more and more in the future. And while we have looked at each of those individually and have a good grasp of them and are doing a lot of work, we see more work on poverty as an overarching issue in our future. And we see more integrated work between poverty and employment, employment and housing, housing and children and youth at risk. So although these are listed as separate bullets, I think that one of the challenges that we face is how do we do even more integrated work on all of these in the future. Health care inequalities and health disparities, those are issues that we have looked at in depth at MJB in the past. I think that the message here is that those are also not going away anytime soon. In some areas, there have been increased challenges, mostly having to do with systematic reform in mental health in Israel, and maybe some sort of a gap that we've identified between what the government thinks is going to happen and what we have actually identified as happening currently. And so I think that probably one of the main factors that we'll be stressing is inequalities and health disparities in mental health. But I think that we will not be moving away from some of the more classic issues such as disparities in providing general health services, accessibility, financial issues having to do with structural issues in the healthcare. Barriers and gaps in education. We have a strong presence in that field in primary education and in education for underserviced populations in Israel. I think that a challenge is going to be looking beyond K-12 education and looking both at technologistical training and education for young adults and higher education for underserviced populations in Israel, probably with a stress on Arab population, populations of Ethiopian descent, and Haredi ultra-Orthodox population. The changes in family structure, I think that we in Israel, in Israeli society, have benefited from being slow changers in that field, and I think that some of the non-classical family structures have taken longer to find root in Israel. But it's easy to see that we are on the same road that all other Western societies are on. We see a much higher and increasing rate of divorce among families. We see divorce taking a much more legal stance than it has in the past. We see non-traditional family structures as far as the presence of parents or the absence thereof and the different structures of the family. And all of those changes are coming together to require us to spend more effort and focus on how families are structured and how that is affecting children of those families. And finally, barriers to full social engagement of people with disabilities. That is, again, one of the strong traditional areas that we have been in. I think that the message here is the challenge is to do more integrated work on this and to tie our work together with work on employment and work on youth and young adults to provide a more and integrated to this.
I had said to get the mail and water plant. I think you did.
I don't know if that was a comment or if we're hearing someone else's conversation. I apologize. Okay, so if I'm going to move on, and with your permission, I'd just like to go through at least these first two sections of challenges and the relationship with the government of Israel. And then, Irv, if it's okay with you, I would suggest that maybe we pause for some discussion on those two before we move on to that next chapter, which would be the goals for 2019 and beyond. Is that okay with you, Irv?
No, that's fine.
Okay. So moving on to the second part of the relationship with the government of Israel. As I said, the government of Israel is both a partner of equal stake in the Institute together with JDC and the Myers Foundation. And they're also our largest client in the amount of business that we do and in the amount of paid that we do for them. But taking that role separately, I'd like to look objectively at the government of Israel and see what changes are happening there and how we can expect those changes to impact the integration of research and what they will be expecting from us. First of all, and this is a good point, we see that the government of Israel is increasing its efforts to be more holistic and more interministerial in its responses to social issues. That was less the situation in the past, and the government had taken more of a siloed approach, each ministry looking individually at its respective issues. We're happy to report that the government is looking to partner with between ministries. That's a better approach for Israeli society, but that will also require MJB to be more integrated in our responses so that we can be ready to provide those holistic research points of view and responses that the government will be looking for. The government is also more and more interested in looking to other countries to see what we can learn from their experiences. That has always been the case, but we see that happening more and more as time goes on. There's more of a conversation with other countries, there's more travel involved, there are more conference calls happening, there's more Israeli participation in international forums. If we want to stay ahead of the curve on that, I think that we can actually guide the government of Israel through our international network, which is based, among other things, on your participation and your networks. Whether those are professional, academic, or other types of personal connections. We can not only follow the government on this cue, but I truly believe that we can be of service in guiding the government into learning from other countries, from similar experiences. Third, the government is continuing to gain expertise in outcomes-oriented planning and measurement and quality assurance. I can proudly say that in no small measure, the government is doing more of that work because of the guidance that it's receiving from Myers-JDC-Brookdale today and in the past. A major part of what we do is teaching and guiding and counseling the government on how to do exactly that type of outcomes-oriented planning, and that is taking root. And we believe it's going to provide better services and planning for the Israeli society, but more and more of that. Maybe I can just ask everyone to recheck that their microphones are on mute, so that we'll have less background noise as we go along. And finally here, we know that the government of Israel is constantly searching to be more cost-effective and more cost-efficient, and to make sure that the funds that it is allocating for social issues are being used in the most efficient process. We can call this evidence-based policy and evidence-based interventions. A big example of this, one prime example, is the most recent government initiative to invest over 3 billion shekels in improving the economic standing of Bedouins in the Negev. And they are investing a large sum in following up on this government decision and conducting research to make sure that the plans that are implemented are the most cost-efficient possible, that the money is, those 3 billion shekels are being invested where the evidence points to where they are most needed, making sure that the interventions are working based on evidence and not only on thoughts, feelings, or impressions. So I think that we are, the relationship with the government of Israel here at MJB is going to strongly be affected by shifts that we identify in government, I think that if we are aware of these, that we can certainly make sure that we're staying on par and even ahead of the curve, preparing ourselves to provide the best response that we can. Irv, at this point, if it's okay with you, I'd like to pause and to get some input, reflections, and have a discussion on these two items or two chapters, making sure and being mindful that we keep enough time to go back and talk about the goals and how we plan to implement some of those thoughts as we move forward. So I'm going to stop here, Irv.
Well, then let's open the floor and see if anybody would like to discuss or question. Are there questions?
I have a question.
Go ahead.
What are the significant restrictions and limitations that the government of Israel has placed on us? I'm going to get that done.
Okay, so the question was, what types of restrictions has the government placed on us?
Yes, and the second part of the question is, do we chase after what they're interested in, or do we come up with our own things?
Okay. I honestly can't say that I've identified any serious restrictions. I think that the main game changer has already happened, and that was the negotiation of a new contract in 2016, which changed the way that the Institute interacted with the government, and also provided for different allocation of services. It set a certain minimum of deliverables that would have to be justified and shown on a line-to-line basis for the government year to year. I think that the last 2 years have taught us already a lot about how we have to work with the government. I think it pointed out some of the maybe some of the flaws that were in that agreement. There were a lot of things that were left open-ended, and I think that we've pretty much dealt with them. For example, how do we set a work plan? How do we define those list of definite deliverables that had to be provided every year? How do we do risk sharing? For example, the government would say to us, we have this new unit we're opening up. We'd very much like you to do some evaluation of this, and that will be on this list of deliverables. And then January, February, March go by, and April, May, June, and we come to August, September, and we say, well, government, what happened to that unit? And they say, oh, that never materialized, but you still owe us a deliverable. And we said, yeah, but now it's August and September, and that one thing you asked us to do, you didn't provide that. How can we actually provide a deliverable? And they said, oh, so that's your problem, because you do owe us all that list of deliverables at the end of the year. So that's something that we have worked through. That was something that was not evident when the contract was renegotiated. But we worked through that with the government, and the government now does realize that that provided a very difficult situation for us because of that lack of risk sharing. So we've worked through a list of how to define which programs are best to put on that definite list of deliverables, and that we wouldn't want to travel from year to year and then accumulate to a point when it would be very, very difficult for us to handle that. Other than that, Nancy, I really don't see very many restrictions. I think that the government is becoming more aware of what evidence means. I think they're becoming more, I'm going to say, aware and maybe demanding of rigorous research. I think that the government, this is not a restriction, but is expecting from us more evidence-based policy recommendations, more evidence-based evaluations, more numbers-backed recommendations and evaluations of programming, understanding a lot more what's happening and then also why it's happening. I don't actually see those as restrictions. I think that those are good points. That means that we have a smart, intelligent, aware, and informed client that can do a better job of saying what it needs most. And we actually embrace that because we think that we can provide a great service once that has been defined. The second part of the question was, do we chase what the government is asking us for, or do we put forward the things that we need? I think that that's probably one of the main challenges of an institute such as ours, that on the one hand, benefits from an insider status, but on the other hand, will fight tooth and nail to maintain its objective research status. I think there are very few organizations that are positioned exactly on that fulcrum, that are exactly in that center on the one hand of having to work hand in hand with the government. We don't have the privilege of attacking the government or of being, a watchdog. That's not who we are. We work together with the governments to make better decisions. But on the other hand, we can't be a lapdog, and we can't only do what it is that the government wants. I think that is the art of doing applied research. So do we chase the government's needs, or will we show the government the needs? I think the answer is yes, and that we probably have to do both. And I think that is the challenge. And actually, I like that challenge. And even though on a day-to-day or hour-to-hour basis, somebody in the government might think that it's better for us to just do what they say, everybody that I've met with in professional government knows that they can't afford for us to not be that voice that's telling them where they have to go. When we presented our vision and mission statement to the government, which among other things talks specifically about identifying challenges and showing the government what it is that we need to do. It says the Institute identifies and examines key social challenges. Examining is what the government asks us. Identifying is when we say to the government, look, you need to look at this, and we're going to move forward on that. You will soon recognize that that's important. So I hope that I was able to provide an answer to both of those questions, Nancy.
Thank you.
Are there any other questions before we go on?
Yeah, it's Bruce. I have one quick question. It's kind of a follow-up. It's from the same part of the big document, the section strategic goals, where you talk about the core contract with the government, and that there's some possibility that they might not. That it's possible that they might not actually renew it after 2020. I mean, did you just put that in there because? Yeah, it's possible we want to cover all the bases, or is there any real concern that the government might not renew the contract, the core contract, in the same way that they've been doing?
Yeah, I think that usually the way that we measure threat is by capability and intent, right? Whenever you assess a threat, you say, is someone capable of doing something, and do they have an intent to do it? Any one of them alone is not enough to create a threat. I don't believe there is a threat, because I certainly don't believe that there's intention to do that. There is capability. It is a contract. It can be renegotiated. And if we look at the past, they say it's very difficult to make predictions, especially about the future. But if we look at the past, the government did renegotiate that contract. And in 2016, the contract looked different than it did from 2015 and earlier. So I do feel a responsibility to put this in, and this is a strategic document, meaning that we're looking at what are the big things that could change the way that we work. And I think that in, part of my responsibility is to bring in some of the potential for major change. But in direct response to the question, I do not identify that as a major issue, and I do not identify it as a threat. Because although I do recognize the potential for that, the capability for that to happen, I don't identify the intent. That has not come up with our partners in the government. That has not come up from any other sector. Most have put that in so that we don't get lazy.
Okay, got it. Thank you.
Fall asleep at the wheel.
Which I'm sorry, because I'm going to have to bounce about 10 of 10. Which university are you thinking of pairing with?
Okay, so that actually jumps ahead to some of the goals that we're trying to do. That's strategic goal number 5. Nancy, I want to ask you, there are 20 minutes left. I wanted to know if maybe, I believe, Nancy, that we can get to that after presenting the goals section. I wanted to know if that would be okay to maybe come back before you have to leave. Okay, she's saying yes.
Yes, yes.
Okay. Are there any other questions?
All right, let's go on.
Okay, so if it's okay with you, I'm going to go back to that document and then go on to that last part. of our goals, and number 5 of these goals will be that question that Nancy just asked. So, looking at the environmental scan and the government scan and the internal scan, we've come up with these are the top 5 goals. It's not an exhaustive list. There are more things, and these may come up as questions. Are you thinking about X or Y or Z? And I'll be happy to entertain those. The answer is going to be yes. But I did put these up as the top 5 that we see happening immediately, and ones that we'd like to achieve certainly in 2019 and probably beyond. All of these are geared in order to allow us to maintain our position as Israel's leading institute for applied social research. The first is to promote and support the use of data for effective policy and decision making. I touched upon that mostly from the side of the government of Israel. This also is something that we've seen other leading research institutes in the social sciences around the world are doing. This is a way for us to talk about the use of big data and everything that goes into that, using administrative databases, using geographic data, cross-linking databases so we can learn more and more about social issues, behaviors, risk factors, and interventions based on data that are already lying around that may not even have to be collected, just need to be utilized. This, you know this and you understand this and you've seen this from the world of marketing and the whole digital world, you know, Google and Microsoft and Facebook all use different parameters of where we live and how long we're online and what websites we visit and what we order on Amazon and how long we stay on WhatsApp and what words are going into the language that we're using in Facebook. This is natural language processing and big data. That's only one example. No one is really doing it yet in the social environment, but we can say, where are people going? How are they traveling? You know, how long are they staying employed? What is the mean income in the neighborhood that they're living in? You know, how many buses go by? What's the public transportation like? What's the dropout rate in a certain area? How many 911 calls are being received? It's possible using big data, using machine learning, using artificial intelligence. I know this all sounds like science fiction for us. People are actually doing this. People are doing it in the social arena as well. Nancy, you asked what universities are we pairing with. In October, we'll be visiting Johns Hopkins, and we'll be spending a day there talking with the experts there that are doing exactly this type of research with the federal government and the state of Maryland and the city of Baltimore, looking at how they've been using this type of data to do exactly this type of informing for governments. In May, we visited in Cleveland at Case Western Reserve University through a very strong and warm connection with David Fleshler. We visited with probably one of the US's leading experts, Claudia Colton, who's actually been way ahead of the curve and has been doing this type of big data for social science for many years before anyone actually knew what to call it. And she showed us some very exciting work that they've been doing. We had a real-time video conference with them where researchers from MJB were doing a Zoom call like this with researchers from Case Western Reserve. We have one of their senior people who will be visiting here in the fall to help us do some more training on that. We have one of our researchers that will be traveling there in October so that she can learn from some of the experts there. So this is the type of strengthening that we will be doing, for example, in promoting the supporting of use for data and effective policy and decision making. But I'll be able to say even more about that as we move forward and get to number 5. So goal number 1 is to promote data. We're training our people, we're retooling our systems. This is not Greek for them. Our researchers know the concepts of use of data, but we're updating our tools and making the partnerships that we need. So we'll have both the technological tools available and also the insights from people that have already been doing this type of work. The second goal is promoting innovation and cutting-edge research approaches. Again, to be clear, we've always innovated at Brookdale, and we've always looked for the next big thing, and I'm proud to say that we have, that we're up to date and that we are where we should be. But this is a strategy document and looking forward and understanding shifting needs and what has become, standard practice for institutes like our own, and the standards of what the government will expect from us and what we should expect from ourselves. We will be looking to more rigorous research and methodologies, randomized trials, econometrics and cost-benefit analyses. Computational data science goes back as a fancy way of saying, analyzing those big data sets and using large mega databases. In the future, probably not going to happen in 2019, is learning how to analyze audio, how to analyze video and pictures, maybe internet texts. So I think that in 2019, we'll definitely be training our people and learning more of the language about how to do this type of thing and creating the partnerships. And we'll be doing that so we can maintain our status as being a leader in this field into the future. The third field is developing new areas of research. We will not, and we have no plans to leave at the side any of the research that we're currently doing. We'll be continuing our work in children and youth at risk. We'll be continuing our work on disabilities and aging and healthcare and employment. But we do want to look for the next big thing. Do we chase the research or do we lead the research? I think that this number 3, developing new areas of research, is talking about leading the pack. We have created a method to do that here at the Institute, which is to provide protected time for researchers that are already on staff so they can come up with new, intriguing, interesting, and futuristic ideas. And we're actually going to provide an infrastructure and protected time for them to work on those ideas. Some of them we may solve. Some of them we may find that there's no real content there. Others of them we may find that we're creating the next new team. We currently have 3 topics that are on this innovation team, the Pathfinder team. One is cyberbullying. That's a big issue. We're starting with cyberbullying of social workers, but we'll be moving on to cyberbullying of children and seeing how, what children are at risk. By the way, the answer, spoiler alert, is all the children are at risk for what they see in the cyber world. Another issue here has to do with poverty, and I mentioned the integrative work that we want to do on poverty, poverty and employment, poverty and poor working families, poverty and children at risk. The question here is, what is the cost? How much does it cost Israel? What are we paying, both in financial and in social terms, for the fact that we have poor people in Israel? And the third and final project we're working on so far has to do with affordable housing. That's a big issue in the US. It's a big issue here. All of the experts say that we have a tremendous housing bubble here and that housing is non-sustainable. In our visit in October, we will be sending researchers from MJB to spend time with experts. Nancy, I want to thank you for hooking us up with some of the experts that you know in this field and others that we've reached through people in you, our lay leaders in your network, so we can learn more about this. And there's a specific project, a certain government program that we've actually been approached and asked to study for the government. So we're leading the government on this one, and the government's right behind us. We haven't worked in the past with the Ministry of Urban Development. And now they said, oh, you're offering us this service to evaluate this government program. Where have you been this whole time? We didn't know you were there. That is a great segue into number 4, which is broadening MJB's client base to include new government ministries. That affordable housing was one issue where the idea came up because we provided a framework for people on staff to bring in these new ideas. They identified a leading social issue here in Israel. We pitched it to a government ministry that we hadn't worked with before. And they said, where have you been all this time? We didn't know that you could do this type of work for us. We're branching out. We're not going to leave behind the Ministry of Education and Social Welfare and Health. But we will be doing more work with the Ministry of Justice. We'll be doing more work with the Ministry of Urban Development and Housing. We're doing more work with the Ministry of Agriculture, who's taken government responsibility to implement the government decision on the economic status of the Bedouins in the Negev. So I have a saying that says you can't hide good work. And so we do good, solid work here at Brookdale, and the more we do, the more it's exposed, and the more people will learn about us, and the more good we'll be able to do for the government. So that's why we're trying to broaden our client base. I do have to say, going back to Bruce Corman's question, there is a certain element of making sure that we're not relying on the same group of 5 forever, and also developing our ability to work with a broader section of the government in the eventuality that something in the government contract changes in the future, so that we will already have experience working with additional ministries, additional units of government, for example, the Council of Higher Education, the Knesset, the Comptroller. These are all areas of government that we're learning and increasing the amount of work we're doing with to make sure that we are more robust in our model and not only relying on that same contract existing forever. And finally, the 5th goal is to strengthen cooperation with academia. I did mention 2 of the universities in the US that we are currently working with, which are Johns Hopkins and Case Western Reserve. We're starting with places that we see a high level of identity in the work that we're doing. And this is a very, very important aspect where you, our lay leaders, can provide us with a strong backbone. The fact that you have provided for us an entryway to create a conversation with Johns Hopkins and with Case Western Reserve has made it much, much easier for us to create this relationship and to learn how to do it and what is beneficial for both sides. And this is a two-way street. I want to be clear that both Case and Hopkins both identify benefits from working with us, whether it's working with Israel, working with MJB. It's not a one-way street. And so this is another way that we definitely see the lay leadership helping us to move towards these goals. We do see ourselves cooperating and strengthening our relationship with at least one university in Israel. Currently, we're in a conversation with Hebrew University here in Jerusalem. JDC Israel has a strong relationship with the Hebrew University, and many of our staff have either come up through Hebrew University or teach there periodically or maintain professional relationships. What we're seeking to do now is to institutionalize relationship. We think that having students here doing their research work, doing their graduate work, would provide benefit for us. You always do better work when someone's looking at you. You always perform better when students are around. We also see that as an opportunity for us to, I'm going to say, audition future talent, so that if we have master's students or doctoral students seeking out projects here, that may be a good way for us to try people out for future recruitment. And we also see that there's a lot of reputational benefit. If we are affiliated or working closely or have a partnership with academia, that takes away one of the tools that some people use to criticize our work. Was that we can do a really good applied research, but it's not really the most rigorous research because in universities they do it differently. That gives us the opportunity to say, well, no, we're actually partnering together with universities, and so we have reputational benefit of the rigor of what we're doing. So those are the top 5 that I'm presenting to you for our strategic goals for 2019 and beyond. And Irv, again, I'm going to stop here and maybe allow time for some more questions and discussion.
All right, who wants to start?
So this is David Fleschler. I'll start and ask a question that really follows up on Bruce's in some ways. In the strategic document, Michael, you talk about potential competitors, and that there's really nobody out there that is really a competitor. But as we're sort of looking 2, 3, 4 years out, can you paint the landscape a little bit? So these are the basic goals. Are there others that can potentially do this? As you look at what the contract looks like starting 2020. Where can we understand the context of what the Institute is doing and what others are doing out there?
Okay, I think that in the short term, I do not identify competition for MJB tactically. And as a tactical decision, how much of my time today should be spent on competing with others? Very little. But it is a very important strategic issue because that landscape is going to change. And I see that happening in 3 axes. The first has to do with the type of research that we were doing. We always have had a mix of research projects. Some of them were short-term evaluations, mostly of pilot projects in their initial and midterm phases. Another part of our basket was doing more extended research, more evidence-based, more data-driven, more empiric research. I think that in that first group of short-term, more qualitative analyses and evaluations of pilot programs, I think that the competition is springing up everywhere. I think that social evaluation or evaluation of social projects has become a catchphrase. I think it's much more developed. I think that the tools are much more available, and we see that more and more small outfits are offering themselves to do this type of work. Those are usually tender-based. I don't think that as of today, MJB's strength is in competing in tenders. I think that our strength is in doing different type of work. What that will do for us is saying maybe there are types of work that we have to leave for others. We often are criticized for the cost of our work, but we provide a premium, and so you get what you pay for. And it's possible that we may have to move the needle and allow other people that are competent to do some of our work so we can create more room for us to do work that only we can do. I think that the second is in academia. Academic researchers usually shied away from work with the government here in Israel and enjoyed a position of relative freedom to say what they want, to research what they want, and to dig more and more deeply into theoretical aspects of research. And there has been a slow shift in that, and we see academic researchers competing for government contracts to do that type of work. It's still not common. But just recently, we saw the Treasury, right, the Ministry of Finance, set out a tender to do a certain type of research, not in our channel. It was not in our lane. We didn't miss out on this. But we're acutely aware of the government suddenly putting out tenders and academia suddenly responding to that. And so we identify that as something that will shift in the future. We want to be prepared. And the third and final channel, I think, is maybe a mix-up between what a think tank is and what an applied research institute is. There are very, very many think tanks here in Israel that some identify as think tanks, others identify themselves as social policy institutes. And they tend to say, you know, we can analyze a problem, but we don't work with the government to provide a solution because we maintain a certain neutrality or objectivity. I think that the threat here is confusing the clients, because the clients are not always aware of the difference between giving advice and actually going and making a recommendation and then evaluating and following up over time. So I apologize if my answer was a little long, but I thought that this would be a good place to put this in. I don't think that we're in any immediate threat from competitors that we can see. You know, no visual enemy here. But I think that we can clearly see the trends that are leading us to in a place where if we do not continue to maintain our position as a leader, that we may eventually find some of the things that we always thought were ours being taken away and being done by others.
Thank you. Very helpful.
Does anyone else have a question? I've got a question. You indicated that there was a housing bubble, and then you connected it to the lack of sustainable housing. Is the connection the fact that prices, the poor people are being priced out of the housing market? Is that what's happening?
I think that the problem, first of all, let me start before I continue. I am probably the furthest thing that we can see from a housing expert. And not only that, but the Institute is currently learning a new topic and we're trying to get a grasp about the topic. So I'm going to do my best to answer that very important question, Irv, but as you know, you're a housing expert and I certainly am not. But I think that for quite a while, the poor have been marginalized in the housing market. And what we see is this social issue is becoming so large, even the middle class is now, it's now unsustainable. Even working couples that both partners work, and some are even supported by families, can't afford to buy houses, even those with advanced degrees, people that we see as being middle class, say it's unsustainable. And yet we see prices continuing to increase. The government is profusely sweating over this. They're trying just about everything about releasing additional land reserves, creating incentives for housing developers to provide lower cost housing. When we say affordable housing in Israel, I think that intrinsically it means something a little different than that reflects in the US. There's a very small rental market. There's a very small business model for building houses for purposes of rental. But I think that where Israel in general, and certainly here at Brookdale, we're at the stage of understanding the issues. We understand it's a problem, but I think that we have to develop a better understanding of the issues at hand and of attaining the vocabulary. So I apologize for not being more of an expert at this early stage on the issue of affordable housing. But the immediate issue that we have here is one that is tremendously challenging. There's currently a government program to a tender, an open tender for real estate developers to receive discounts on taxes and low-cost land to build houses that they can guarantee will be sold at the lowest price. That's a great program. It's currently unevaluated. So the government has made this decision with no basis of evidence and no way to find out how it's helping. That's where we stepped in and said, look, this is called a natural experiment. Let's step in and help you measure it as it goes through. And they said, oh, that's a great idea.
Oh, thank you. So that will probably be our first project with that ministry. Is that correct?
Absolutely correct. Yes, it is. And they are so excited about this that they have asked us if they can come and attend the site visits that we're setting up in the Baltimore area through Nancy and her connections. And they're saying, you know, we'd like to learn anything you can. Can you really expose us to people and experts that are doing this? We didn't realize that you can provide us international connections. So it was just really a great connection for us and a way for us to, again, you know, show our role as leaders and pulling the government to where it needs to be and not only following the government where it's asking us.
Thanks. We've got a couple of minutes left. Are there any other questions from the floor?
Yes, I have one question, please.
Go ahead, please.
Given the nature of the structure of the government of Israel and how various ministries are controlled by various political parties, does that interfere in the ability of the agency to engage with various ministries and the cooperation that would follow and the financial aspects?
I actually am very, very proud to say that on the whole, the answer is no. I think that over 44 years of experience of Myers-JDC-Brookdale Institute working with the Israeli government, the wonderful and dedicated and experienced researchers here have developed such a close and trusted relationship with the professional government that the work that we do manages to work through the ebb and tide of shifting political government. Now, we say that we work together with the government ministries. To be clear, we work together with professional government. We work with mid and high level professionals working in government, those that work through changing political views. That is probably the second part of the art. We talked about the art of the Institute before about, you know, do we follow, do we lead? Do we tell them what they want to hear? Do we tell them what they need to hear? I think that the other part of the art that happens here is how to maintain relationships with the government through shifting politics. I say that you know, I do have some experience working as a professional in government here in Israel with the Ministry of Health. I can tell you that every mid to high level professional in government, the third drawer down in his desk is the drawer where papers go until the next government comes in. So when there are some good ideas, and we know that they're not viable now because the right politics is not in place, there's sort of an agreement that happens throughout professional government that sort of gets stored until a window of opportunity reopens. And both the government knows how to do that, and we know how to take a strong view. And we know how to work together with professionals in government on the background, on developing issues, on working on the vocabulary and the proposals. So when the window of opportunity reopens, we're positioned to move forward on that quickly.
Thank you. We've got maybe 1 minute left. Are there questions, or do we want Michael to briefly summarize? Any questions? All right, Michael, would you kindly wrap it up? Daniel, do you have a question?
I just said perhaps I thought summarising might be a bit of a challenge at the time. It's just general direction is where we go from here.
Okay, let's conclude with that.
Okay, so first of all, I want to thank everyone here for their time. It was a great pleasure and honor to be able to present you know, my thoughts on this draft of a strategy moving forward. I want to thank you for your questions and the fact that you had these questions and are asking, you know, the tough issues. And I'm actually happy that we have some basis for those, that I can answer some of those. We have taken notes on them, and I think that I would like to stress, if these are questions that you're having, then I would very much like to make sure that they are represented in a final version of this strategy document. I think that if anybody has additional comments that they would like to make or add, if you haven't had a chance to look at that document before the conversation, before this discussion, but you'd like to look at it after, I'd certainly be happy to see any of those, you know, even further down the road. I think that the rest of the plan would be to go back to this draft version of the strategy and make sure that it makes sense to me, having heard some of the issues that you've raised today. After that, I would like to share this document with New York, with JDC in New York, so they can see you know, what our thoughts here are at the Institute, together with the input and the guidance that we receive from our lay leadership. And then that, I guess, would form the basis for our drafting the work plan for 2019.
Okay. Anybody have a parting shot, concluding remark? If not, then thank you all for participating. And if you have some thoughts about this document before it gets sent to New York, please contact Michael and share your thoughts with him sooner rather than...
Can I say one thing in closing? I'm always surprised by the goals and the work and the depth of what you all are able to do and achieve in your reach in the country, in Israel, and now you're expanding into Baltimore. Anyway, it's amazing. Job well done.
Thank you, Annie. I appreciate that very much. And if it's okay with you, I'd like to relay that to the people here at the Institute that did the work. They'll be very happy to know that that's what you say. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Annie. And that's a good note on which to conclude. Thank you all for participating. And we will see you in New York shortly.
Okay, see you soon.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Irv,
Okay,
thank you so
Michael.
much for having us on this meeting, Irv. I appreciate it very much. Thank you for allowing us to do this and for allowing me the opportunity to share this with the lay leaders. Thank you for leading the meeting. And for everyone, Shana Tova.
Lashana Tova.
Okay. Really quickly, Michael?
Yes.
Michael?
Yes.
Yeah, I would have been in sooner, but I didn't realize you had to download the whole app to get in.
Sorry.
Okay, well, I guess we'll learn some lessons from this time and try to make it more approachable next time.
Okay, I've got it now. It finally got in. Do you have a recording of the meeting that we can access for the full
Yes,
meeting?
we do. Thank you. That's an excellent point. Thank you so much. We do have a recording, and we'll be able to share it so that you can go back and hear yourselves later. And so we'll be able to share it with people who were unable to attend today. Thank you for that point. Very important.
Well, and for those of us that couldn't get in.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
Very much.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye.